as South Africa would forcibly break up exclusive Afrikaner enclaves. So, without further ado, could we please have the Prime Minister open the debate for us here. And please just remember that your phones need to be on silent.
Panel, as the government of South Africa, one of our top priorities is ensuring the legacy of apartheid is awash from our country. We believe the policy that this House stands with is one of the best ways to do this and take South Africa forward in a couple of ways. I'm going to be going over three in my speech. Firstly, why the status quo is a continuation of apartheid through soft mechanisms, and this will change it. Secondly, why we ought to prefer South Africans in general over Afrikaners specifically. And thirdly, how this will eradicate some of the classism we currently see in our society and why this is a policy we should thus act on. So, getting into my first point of substanding. Why the status quo is a continuation of apartheid and this will change it. Despite apartheid formally being ended in our country, it continues to exist for a couple of soft power mechanisms. Firstly, wealth. Secondly, prestige. And thirdly, culturally. We think that the absolute personification of these three mechanisms are these enclaves that we see in the status quo, where basically Afrikaner groups exist in wealthy, closed-off, gated communities away from the rest of our broader society. We think that by basically disrupting these enclaves of wealth that do not properly integrate into the rest of our society, we're going to get a couple of outcomes that forces apartheid to end through these soft mechanisms. Firstly, we force groups to live together, which is the whole point of integration, the whole point of ending apartheid. The fact that these groups live in a separate gated community means that they do not want to be part of the rest of our country, and we do not think this is an acceptable thing for our country as we go forward. Secondly, we think that it allows the power that these groups hold to be redistributed due to the fact that it's no longer kept in these gated communities. So, because we're going to go in and disrupt these wealthy Afrikaner settlements, and make them redistribute into the population more generally. We think that the flow-on effect of this means that they're interacting far more with the rest of the South African community, and we think that this means power is distributed far more evenly in a world where we implement this policy as opposed to public government. So, the benefits are, despite the fact that this will cause short-term instability, which I'm sure will be brought up by opposition, this will long-term bring an incredibly beneficial change. The fact that there is a short-term harm is something we acknowledge, but we think that the long-term benefit we gain, I'll take you in a minute, is make this policy far more worth it due to the fact that the outcomes we get by forcing people to integrate in a more broad sense is something we uniquely get. Yeah, I'll take you now.
Please engage on the amounts of the motion in regards to forcibly breaking down these enclaves.
I am engaging on forcibly breaking up these communities. I think that's what the government should do. That's what we're standing for. If we're not doing it forcibly, it would not be happening otherwise. So, moving on to the second point of substandard, why we ought to prefer South Africans over Afrikaners. So, South Africans, particularly of the native type, have a history of oppression. We think that lots of them have been forced into poor circumstance by a legacy of colonialism. We think, meanwhile, although the descendants are not directly responsible for this colonialism, they do enjoy privileged benefits because they were born into privileged circumstances. As a result, despite being a far smaller population-wise, they hold a disproportionate amount of power in these Afrikaner groups. The result of this analysis is that long-term, the only way that we can further a nation of actual equality of power between all people is by prioritising the rights of a far larger group that has far less power in our society. We think that this policy acts on this perfectly. Thus, that's one of the reasons we all prefer South Africans over Afrikaners. We think that this policy achieves its outcomes in the following way. Firstly, by making people redistribute from these communities, we think that they're more likely to interact with South Africans and think that they're more likely to share their power. Secondly, we think that a lot of the permissive mechanisms that they use to hold on to their power, such as basically business deals that they only engage in, schools that they only engage in, mechanisms like that are broken down by forcing these enclaves to break up and forcing them to integrate more broadly into African society. And thirdly, we think that it just means that they're more likely to interact because they're seriously just bumping into people more rather than being in a sheltered enclave. So, as a result, we think that while this does prioritise South Africans over Afrikaners, it does not harm the Afrikaners significantly but also brings the best long-term outcomes for South Africans, who are the most important stakeholders today, due to the fact that they have a history of vulnerability, due to the fact they have a history of oppression, and the Afrikaners people have a history of privilege and a history of enjoying the benefits of colonialism. Moving on to my third point of substantive, why we think that this will end some of the classism that exists in modern South Africa. So as was touched on, there is a colonial legacy in South Africa, and as the government, it is something that we would want to move away from, particularly as a post-apartheid government. We think that the entrenched class structure of inherited wealth and negated communities are very emblematic of this. This policy directly disrupts these classes enclaves in two ways. Firstly, by forcing them to dismantle and redistribute more evenly into the rest of the community. We think that as a result, their wealth mechanisms are redistributed into the rest of the community. Secondly, by forcing the integration of wealth into broader society, we think it means that opportunities are offered more broadly to the rest of society that would not otherwise be offered unless we offered this policy. So, what are the impacts of this, and why would we care about them as a South African government? Firstly, we think this achieves greater social mobility due to the fact that wealth isn't held in a few enclaves within the city and wealth is distributed far more evenly. We think this means that people are able to move from the poorer social rungs to the higher social ladder, and that's something that we would prioritise as a democracy, and particularly as a post-colonial democracy, we would want to prioritise this. Secondly, we think that this would cause much economic benefit to our country due to the fact that social mobility being in place means that there is more of an incentive for people to work, more of an incentive for businesses to expand, and as a result we just get like all the niche benefits of capitalism working properly. So, at the end of this speech, what I've gone through is that the South African government gets three main benefits. Firstly, breaking down soft mechanisms around apartheid. Secondly, ending classist outcomes that are currently present in society. And thirdly, prioritising the majority of our people, which is our responsibility as a democratic liberal government, over a minority of our people, which is something we do not have as a motivation, particularly as a post-colonial government. So for our two proposals.
So South Africa being a multicultural country means that we need to recognize the right of all cultures, including the Africans. The African are excluded to South African nationality and South African culture. And most of everything that the Deputy Prime Minister said, like mobility, like inequality, like oppressions, they can be solved without dissolving the Afrikaans enclaves. Because I'll start saying that this is run out of the real problem. The real problem is that there exists poor parts of cities, that exist low development neighborhoods, and this low development neighborhood needs to be improved and not only change people from places. Because the problem is not geographical, the problem is social inequality, the problem is economical. So South Africa needs to advance in social equality, South Africa needs to advance in economic equality, although it will not happen destroying the African culture or even damaging even the black culture that are not directly linked to this place, to this enclaves. So what we're trying to do here is a symbolic movement that will bring more problems, because it will try to in the case of the government trying to protect some cultures will destroy others, and also is running out of the real problem. That is not geographical, but it's economical, because it will have underdeveloped places everywhere. It's not only because I'm moving people from a city that's a rich city, that they will have employment, that they will have been inserted on their culture, that they have the knowledge necessary to achieve good jobs, don't have this direct link. Mostly because these people don't only need to be moved for neighborhoods, they also need to be included on South African nationality. And the South African nationality isn't us versus them ideology. South African nationality is conciliation. The problem that the government, the opponent, are necessarily linked with the systems of traditional settled cities by Africans, like Senegal, for example, but with the valuation of black culture and the schools. So that's why we need to improve the knowledge of black history, we need to improve the pride of black history, and not only move people geographically, because it will not solve the problem, it will get worse. We also need to improve the opportunity and social equality. Although it doesn't need to break the class, it needs to give more opportunity, we need to give more scholarship, we need to give more wealth. And we need also to show the Africans that black culture is also part of their nationality. But also the black population needs to see the African culture is also part of South Africa, just as they are. Like, for example, what Mandela did at the Rugby World Cup when they received it here, and the sprint was played against the All Blacks, And this were not seen as an African sport. It was seen as a national sport, as a South African sport. And this is the way. It's not seen, oh, you're black, you're Africans. You're all South Africans, and you need to fight in conciliation and live together, but it not means to don't recognize the oppressions. So bringing arguments directly attached to South Africa nowadays political feeling, to the nowadays political thought built by Mandela. Mandela calls for reconciliation, saying that all South Africans has a shared history, and the oppressions happened. Although oppression happened by all sides, need to be recognized, and social justice needs to be made. But it doesn't mean to exclude Africans to preserve their culture. And we need to say that denying it is, for example, we are not denying that social justice needs to happen. For example, if it's judicial proven that they had recent ownership of land by black tribes, for example, it should be given back. Although the importance of the land for a population is important, why it is a constituent part of their culture. So if a population is living a century far from that region, and they still preserve their culture, this is the proof that they're not necessarily linked to that geographical place. But although on the other side, many African enclaves are directly linked to their culture. So trying to resolve one problem of some population in the wrong way, you'll destroy the other population culture. So that's why the black population are directly linked to the original tribe's place. Because if they can preserve their culture elsewhere, they can be shown that this is not linked to them. This is the black view. But that's why African class should not be broken for means of social justice. Please.
So we acknowledge in our case that there would be short-term disgruntlement from the Afrikaners. However, the long-term integration was the benefit that we're claiming. Why is it this short-term disgruntlement overcomes long-term efforts?
So the short-term proposal that we're actually leaving is like improve living, improve the right of own their houses, but not breaking the Africans' place, not breaking the African neighborhood or enclaves. You can do this like improving the own place that black population do live, for example. You need to move them for another neighborhood, although they can also be linked to this neighborhood that they live in now. So trying to move people from elsewhere is dangerous because the way that they live, the way that they live their days, that they know the streets, they know the vegetation, they know the weather, is also important for their own development. So some black populations doesn't need to be moved from other parts of the country because they do want to live and they do know how to live in the part that they live now. So trying to make this forcible integration will be dangerous for both populations. For example, Mandela multiculturalism isn't necessarily to be one South Africa culture. It's recognized that all South Africans' culture share their own history. So that's why the Africans shouldn't be seen as enemies. And by the Africans' point of view, they are also very linked to this part, to the settlements. So if you are thinking on the first time, on social justice, it is not attached directly to geographical problems, it's attached to another social problem. In the point of view of the black population, they are not culturally linked to this land. In the point of view of Africans, they are directly linked, and their culture are directly linked. In the point of view of South Africa, you destroy the multiculturalism proposed by Mandela by one national, artificial, and non-existence built culture that will not achieve any of the objectives that have been shown. So that's why we doesn't want to try to avoid the habitation problems, for example. We don't want to try to avoid the scholarship problems, although they're not linked to a geographical land. That's why we need to improve education, we need to improve the knowledge and the teachers of black culture in Africa enclaves, but also the teaching of African culture in black enclaves, in black population places. And it isn't necessarily bad, because it's not because you don't see African people on your street that you need to hate them. Because comprehension and conciliation is not forcible. There is teaching at schools as comprehension, as self-comprehension of their own country. So thank you all.
Speaker, the core clash of this debate is twofold. Firstly, it's whether or not the short-term instability that would arise as a result of this legal mandate is worth the benefits of it in the long-term run. The second key issue that we're debating also is weighing up the individual and national benefits of this legal mandate. Now, as Open Gov, we prioritise the needs of the majority of South African citizens. So the minor inconvenience that some Afrikaans would have to experience is far outweighed by the volumes of benefits which would be achieved by breaking down social barriers under our model. Now, before getting into my substantive, there's a few points of rebuttal that I would like to make regarding the opposition statements. Now, firstly, on the issue of priorities. So the opposition mentioned that the underlying problem isn't the geographic isolation. He mentioned that it's more economic and social, and it's not related to geography whatsoever. He also mentioned that by getting rid of these geographic barriers, it won't actually do anything to fix a real problem. Now, in response to this, we agree that there are massive economic and social issues that are at play in South Africa. However, the geographical isolation perpetuates these issues. So we feel that if we start moving towards breaking down these geographical barriers, that would actually encourage integration and would begin to actually take some positive movement towards eliminating some of these massive economical and social separation issues. Now, the second point brought up by the opposition was that South African culture is consolidated and diverse, and we need to start being combined. Now, we completely agree with this. We believe that multiculturalism and diversity is at the top of our priority list for South Africa. However, the opposition didn't demonstrate how by geographically breaking down these barriers, how that would prevent diversity. So, under our model, we believe that where you live and would essentially determine who you meet, the sites you visit, and would go far further than actually promoting cultural integration rather than just doing nothing at all and leaving Afrikaans within their own isolated communities. There were a few priorities that the opposition also mentioned. They said that education, we need to prioritise the education of a better future. We agree. However, we're not really sure how their model would actually support this. A second point brought up by the opposition was that we need to start giving land back to the black population. First of all, I'm not really sure how that's relevant to this topic. However, assuming we can go with that, by actually allowing South Africans and non-Afrikaans South Africans to begin assimilating and integrating with the minority of the Afrikaner population, that would be a much better use of land and for better representation of diversity. The opposition, the last one that we did have a bit of a clash on was weighing up the short-term and the long-term benefits. Now, we acknowledge that in the short term there will be temporary instability economically, financially and socially. However, through this forcible movement. However, we acknowledge that. However, we say it's the whole point of the geographic movement is that we're actually breaking down those social barriers. The geographical, physically, that makes a statement. By keeping these Afrikaner communities isolated, we're acknowledging that it's okay for them to socially and culturally and cognitively be separated from the rest of the majority of the population. Now, the major benefit, and another point brought up, was that if we do go ahead with this model, a lot of native knowledge will be lost through this movement. So, non-African South Africans, non-Afrikaans South Africans wouldn't be able to provide that expertise. However, we say that this is actually a really great benefit because by breaking down these barriers, what we'd be doing is that we're encouraging assimilation. So people who are not Afrikaan will be able to pass on their knowledge to areas that have been previously occupied by Afrikaan conglomerates. Now to the substantive of my debate. So there are two pieces that I'll be bringing up today. Firstly is the role of government to promote diversity and cultural integration. And the second point is how we would actually begin to achieve diversity of thought through following our model. Yeah.
Aren't you about to develop the black theater so if it was also you can't bring social justice without breaking the class?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
You can't bring social justice to this population without breaking the class. Aren't you avoid to develop the black
So we're saying that the whole point of this debate is that we want to break down these social enclaves to actually begin integrating the two cultures rather than being geographically isolated, because we believe that's a massive part of actually allowing them to interact with each other, and we don't understand how in your model that is actually achieved. Now, back to my substantive. So the first point I'd like to make is that it's actually the role of the government to begin promoting diversity and cultural integration in this context. Why? Now, up until this point, the burden of responsibility regarding racial separation of Afrikaans and non-Afrikaans is purely lied within the government. Now, the benefits of integration are owed to the people of the nation. Now, by legally abolishing geographical conglomeration of Afrikaans would be a real step in the right direction to begin promoting and celebrating cultural diversity in South Africa. Now, the existence of socially and physically separated cultural groups, particularly with the Afrikaner communities is we're actually making a positive effort to begin moving forward from the horrors of apartheid, as Declan mentioned. Now, the benefits of integration by legally abolishing geographical conglomerations of Afrikaans would result in the short term there would be political instability because it is a massive change. However, in the long term, we believe that the benefits far outweigh this. Now, there are four main benefits that would arise in the long term. The first is that there'd be increased equity in South Africa. The second would be that we have reduced cultural tensions across the different cultures. Third one would be that it would drastically minimise the likelihood of future cultural conflicts and government revolts. And lastly, it would promote diversity of thought, which leads to my second point, which is around diversity of thought and how we'd actually be able to achieve this through our model. Now, one of the key benefits of social integration is achieving diversity of thought within the South African community. Now, this benefit can't be enjoyed with the isolation and vast divide existing between Afrikaner enclaves. Now, the benefits very quickly include enhanced social awareness, development of mutual understanding amongst the different cultures, and a united patriotic stance on an international level. However, the question is how. So under our model, we'll be achieving this with a simple mechanism. By breaking down the enclaves and promoting social integration nationally would result in breaking down the entrenched social cultural conglomerations which have been in place for decades. So this model essentially forces Afrikaans and other non-Afrikaans to begin geographically migrating and combining in significantly more diverse communities. Non-legal measures would not be as effective. That's why we believe that the forcible legal mandate would contribute to the effectiveness of this measure. It might be forcible, however, it becomes necessary considering these circumstances. That's why I'm asking this place.
First of all, we need to clarify some things. The opposition has made a concession that oppression is bad, and the government can and should promote social integration and diversity. What we disagree is that this promotion should not be aggressive. This promotion should be very slowly, and we have a lot of better opportunities, a lot of better options to do that. And there is an opportunity cost. That's why we should privilege the model of the opposition. And what is the model of the opposition? Promoting diversity in schools, teaching other ethnic cultures that are different from Afrikaans. And we can also promote national integrations like through sports with the World Cup. And that is better not only to the short term, but to the long term. And why this is better? Two arguments, because there is a principal argument. It's more legitimate to do that, not aggressively, but with other forms, and it's more effective because we are not risking have a backfire. Now, principally, why this is more legitimate to this that in the way the opposition is proposing? Because the descendants of Afrikaans people are not and must not be responsible for very, very ancient or some ethnical groups, people's actions. We should not harm individuals because other people about their same ethnical groups has done wrong things. That is collectivism, and that is violating the individual sovereignty. And the government, as a body that should represent all the people, and not only the blacks, should not harm individuals in any way at all. And why do we value this at most, even if the Afrikaans are privileged? We value this the most because if you try to achieve diversity and integration by aggressive policies, we have a massive, huge risk of generating backfire, because we can generate resentment that people have. We have psychological bias against invaders. When you do that aggressively in the short term, people will be very distant. Will start to blame those black peoples for they having taken their homes, their neighbors, and their communities. And we will blame innocent black people because of some something that the government is doing. We're blaming black people because something that they're not even responsible for. It will make huge damages in the short term, like with direct violent actions in the worst case scenario, or in the middle case scenario, we will have prejudice, like directly prejudice with white people against black people, or even institutional prejudice, like with the election of populist politicians. And why this is not happening any achievement even in the long term? Because we have massive evidence that these kind of aggressive policies do not work. Like in Europe, for example, in France, the government has done a lot of affirmative actions, aggressive actions, and that has only created resentment that will harm these black people that the government is saying that this policy will help. This will create a massively harm to those black people. And what the evidence we have from Europe, they have from a lot of decades promoted these aggressive affirmative action policies, such as breaking the enclaves. We will promote not integration, but we will promote ghettos, not in a large scale, but in a smaller scale. But it will also be a division. We will not have achieved multiculturalism. We will only achieve the division, but it's in a small scale. And that's why we should not pursue with this kind of policy. But there is a second principal way to refuse this kind of policy, because the identity of people are very, very strictly related to the territory. The identity of people, the feeling of belonging, are very, very related to the place that they were born, where they were teached, where they have interactions with that communities, where they have created their traditionals, and that this traditional that remained for decades and is very related to that to that place cannot be transformed just in a very short-term policy action.
So your main argument is that backlash will be overwhelming, but in the status quo there is currently backlash from South Africans against Afrikaners for holding the wealth. The comparative is that we get a long-term benefit.
Okay. Well, we can't achieve social integration and diversity without doing this kind of policy. We can make, for example, progressive taxation. We can offer good quality education. There is a more effective long-term policy that do not harm individuals, that do not break these principles that we value the most. There's the principles, the territory, it is very related to the territory, and the principles that we cannot harm individuals for something that their ethical group did. And also we have a feasibility argument. There is a lot of money that we have to do to implement this policy. We have to expropriate properties, or we have to pay very expensive loans in white communities, or we have to pay very expensive rents. And why we should not pursue this policy one with another? Because there is an opportunity cost. There is a clearly better policy to be implemented, and we should focus that and not in policies that harm individuals and are not effective in any way. Thank you.
The opening opposition case amounts to saying that there are better alternatives, but at the end of the front half, I have no idea what those alternatives are or where they're likely to be effective. The closest approximation we get to this is things like emphasizing decolonization in history curriculums in South Africa, as if that's not something that is put down every single grade of every single class of every single school in South Africa already. This is something we've tried. This is decolonization by voluntary recognition that we've tried. We've tried things like offering white people money to give up their property, and that doesn't work, right? The idea that people are going to voluntarily and slowly decolonize and integrate into society is absurd and unsubstantiated at the end of opening opposition. They cannot take this debate. I'm going to do two things in this speech. Firstly, I'm going to answer the big hole in the government case about why violating property and mobility rights is actually justified under the perspective of South Africa. Then I'm going to significantly expand on the notion of how this extensively decolonizes South Africa. All reputation is going to be integrated. Let's start with the idea about why this is justified. I think the first thing to note here is that the ANC, which has ruled South Africa since the end of apartheid, is an explicitly black anti-apartheid decolonization party. For as long as South Africa has existed outside of apartheid, in the literal sense, the party that has ruled has been interested in eliminating the vestiges of that, right? So that's the after analysis that was missing from OG to really contextualize this route. If any government we have that we're talking about, that we're going to evaluate things, has to be rooted in that basic fact about what the party's interest is and what the government for South Africa has always been interested in it. So what does that look like? I think that looks like the constitutional mandate that existed since the past provisional constitution entering in 1996, leading up to continued amendments to the Constitution that are gradually increasing the amount of the purview by which they have to decolonize. I think there's a very strong legal argument to say that South Africa is legally bound to implement this policy on the basis that it is a requisite for successfully decolonizing, a requisite for successfully eliminating the accrual of property and housing that has unjustly affected black South Africans. I think this is the mandate that South Africa has to grapple with and to set up for itself, and this is what it needs to deliver on now. But beyond that, I think it's also important to contextualize why I think white people are so culpable, because this was the burden that opening opposition wanted to run away from. I think the first thing to note here is that in the actual acquisition of these property areas, which will settle in areas with massive economic value, land was forcibly extracted and forcibly seized by black South Africans, right? They say on opening opposition, oh, but that was centuries ago. But the problem is that continues when you continue to hold onto that land unjustly, because the fact that you were born into that land does not mean that you justly acquired it, any more than the fact that white Canadians are born into Canada justifies the fact that they colonized Indigenous people. I think by the exact same principle, the fact that you do not willingly decolonize is something that continues to hold you culpable. The fact that you have not actively tried to retribute the problems is a problem, right? Because if opening government is correct and all of the problems already exist about continued perpetuations and vestiges of apartheid in the economic and cultural sense, then the culpability therefore falls upon white people to be agents to decolonize that or be forcibly dragged into that decolonization, right? I think that's the reason why this is principally justified. The last thing I want to say down here is just to re-emphasize the fact that all voluntary measures that we've tried have been ineffective. And I want to note here the thing that opening opposition says that actually proves their case here, right? They say that we shouldn't do this because this is land that is culturally significant to the Afrikaners. Yeah, well guess what? If it's culturally significant land to them, to the Afrikaners, it's probably not going to be one that they're ever going to want to leave and one that they're ever going to want to decolonize. And guess what? I think that land is also culturally significant to the black South Africans who had it stolen from them. On to why this extensively decolonizes. First thing to note here, the main problems that South Africa faces in terms of decolonization today are economic and housing consolidation. I think that the Afrikaner consolidation of property meets both of these criteria. A couple things to note here. Why is it particularly damaging that they hold on this compared to any other white South African